Colonel Wesley Cord had not held his own coffee cup in 18 years. He carried a travel mug with a locking lid, a gift from his daughter Claire the Christmas after the Tremors started. A clip held it to his wheelchair when he moved. When he sat still, he wedged it between his knees and drank through a bent straw. He'd stopped being embarrassed about it around year 4. Not long after, he'd stopped thinking about it at all. That, Claire told people later, was the worst part. Not the tremors, not the chair. The part where her father, a man who had once commanded 300 soldiers from the front of a briefing room without notes, had simply stopped expecting anything to be different. He was about to find out he was wrong. Mara Stills did not look like someone carrying a secret. 39, 5'4", with the kind of face people forgot 30 seconds after they stopped looking at it. Brown hair pulled back. A small scar along her left collarbone, usually hidden by scrubs. The same bright blue every shift always. Above her name badge, a small enamel pin. A black compass rose on white, the kind nobody ever asked about. Her right coat pocket held a pen, a penlight, and a small object wrapped in blue medical gauze, sealed with a strip of surgical tape. 3 inches long, almost weightless. She had carried it through every shift at Meridian Medical Center in Chicago for 9 years, 6 months, and 11 days. She had never unwrapped it. She was at the nurse's station on the neurology floor at 7:40 that morning, when Dr. Robert Holloway walked past without looking at her. He never looked at her. He spoke to residents, to the charge nurse, occasionally to patients, never to floor nurses unless he needed something, and even then he addressed the wall slightly to their left, as if the request were being made of the air. Holloway was 61, dry-cleaned, decorated, department chief, neurology, University of Chicago School of Medicine, 47 peer-reviewed papers, a photo with a former surgeon general behind his desk. He was not a bad neurologist. He was an exceptional one, and 30 years of being told so had settled into him like calcium into old bone. Stills. His voice came from behind her shoulder, not quite addressed to her. Bay 9 has a new admit, referral, family case. Review the intake file and have it ready. Yes, doctor. He was already gone. The file came through at 8:15, 42 pages. Mara read the last 12 standing at the counter, closed it, and looked down the hall at the door to Bay 9 for a long moment before she walked toward it. Through the glass she saw them first. A man in his 60s in a motorized wheelchair, broad-shouldered, even-seated, in a dark, gray sweater. His right hand rested on the armrest, moving, not wildly, just a low, constant tremor, like a struck bell that had been ringing so long no one remembered the blow that started it. Beside him, a woman in her late 30s, dark-haired, jaw-set, with the posture of someone who'd been fighting a system so long that fighting had become her default. Behind her, a young man in a North Face jacket, weight on his heels, working hard to look calmer than he was. Mara pushed the door open. "Good morning, I'm Mara Stills, I'll be your intake nurse today." The woman spoke first. "Claire Cord, this is my brother Danny, and this is our father, Colonel Wesley Cord, United States Army, retired." Mara looked at the colonel. His eyes came up, dark gray, the color of Lake Michigan in November, the eyes of a man who'd been assessed by many people and had long since stopped caring what they found. "Colonel, it's an honor." He nodded once. His right hand kept its low, patient tremor against the armrest. Mara took his blood pressure, his pulse, his temperature, watching that hand the whole time. Steady, rhythmic, involuntary even under the cuff. She made a note, then removing the cuff, she reached up as if to straighten the collar of his sweater. She did not straighten his collar. She pressed 2 fingers against the bone behind his right ear, the mastoid, and held them there 3 seconds. She felt it at once, a raised nodule, 3 millimeters, smooth, harder than the tissue around it. Wrong shape for a lymph node, wrong shape for a cyst. She withdrew her hand. "Colonel, did you receive any kind of field procedure to your head or neck during the incident in 2006? Wesley looked at her the way a man looks at someone reading him correctly for the first time in years. "There was a medic, said he'd help me hold together till extraction, put something behind my ear, hurt for about a month, then stopped. Nobody since has ever known what the scar was from. They call it an old nerve block site and move on." "How many hospitals?" Claire answered, 5 San Antonio first, then Walter Reed, Mayo Northwestern, now here. Mara nodded and wrote it down. Her face didn't change. Behind them, the door opened. Holloway walked in the way he always entered a room, as though it had been arranged to receive him. He lifted the file from the foot of the bed, flipped 3 pages, set it back without a greeting. "Mr. Cord." Claire's chin lifted. "Colonel Cord, doctor." He glanced at her with the mild interest of a man noting a minor scheduling conflict. "Colonel, I've reviewed your history. The diagnosis is consistent across every prior institution. Severe, progressive essential tremor with features consistent with blast-induced thalamic disruption. 4 medication regimens, 2 DBS consultations, 1 focused ultrasound trial. None gave durable benefit. He closed the file. I won't waste your time suggesting we can do what those institutions couldn't. I can refer you to palliative neurology for quality of life management. Claire's hand went white on the wheelchair's handle. We were told you had an open trial. We have several. Your father doesn't meet inclusion criteria for any of them. The disruption pattern is too diffuse. 18 years untreated means the architecture has remodeled past what our interventions address. He turned toward Mara without looking at her. Stills, discharge the patient. Route them to palliative outreach on the way out. He headed for the door. Mara didn't move. Doctor, her voice stayed at its usual volume. May I speak with you in the hall? I don't take clinical input from nursing staff. Stills. 1 minute, in the hall. Something in his mouth twisted, entertained. Very well. In the corridor, arms crossed, he said, make this quick and make it the last time. Colonel Cord has a subcutaneous mass, 3 millimeters, directly over the right mastoid process. It won't appear in any of his imaging because every prior hospital used standard MRI protocols, and that object only shows on a frequency range nobody in civilian neurology has reason to use. His expression shifted. What object? A neural oscillation bridge. Subdermal. Developed under a DARPA program called Stillwater, 2004 to 2009, declassified in 2018. It was built for soldiers with blast-induced thalamic disruption, severe enough to cause immediate tremor and loss of motor control. The bridge reroutes the disrupted signal around the damaged relay through an alternate pathway, enough to keep a man functional until evacuation. Without recalibration, it degrades. What the colonel has now is what's left of a bridge calibrated once, in a desert 18 years ago, and never touched since. Holloway stared at her. How do you know about a classified DARPA program? I was part of the team that developed the recalibration protocol. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, Stills, I don't know what you think you're doing. This is my department, my patient, and I'm discharging him in 20 minutes. Interfere, and I'll have you removed from this floor today. Understood? Mara turned and walked back through the door. Inside, Danny had moved beside his father's chair. Claire hadn't moved at all. Wesley was watching the door. Mara crossed the room and crouched to his eye level. Colonel Cord, I'd like your permission to examine the area behind your right ear. I won't promise you anything. I haven't done this in 9 years, but I believe the medic in the Korengal did something no doctor in 5 hospitals has known to look for. I'd like to look for it now. Wesley studied her, the compass pin, the scar at her collarbone, her steady hands, her eyes. He had spent 40 years reading men under pressure. He read her the same way. You may. The door opened again. Holloway had the clean-clipped tone of a man delivering a decision. Colonel, I apologize for the delay. Patient Services is preparing your discharge now. Stills, escort the family to the elevator, then come to my office. Mara stayed crouched. Doctor, I'm going to conduct a brief neurological exam, with his consent, 5 minutes. You will do no such thing. Danny planted his feet beside his father. Claire stepped forward. We want her to. We've been to 5 hospitals in 4 states and no one has ever actually looked at him. We're not leaving. Holloway opened his mouth. The colonel spoke first, quietly. He hadn't needed to raise his voice in 40 years. Doctor, I've been addressed by men with stars on their collars, and by a man with his hand on the launch authority for a Minuteman III. I've shaken the hand of 3 sitting presidents. I've also spent 18 years watching my right hand shake too badly to sign a birthday card for my daughter. I'd like to give this nurse 5 minutes, stay or leave. But I am not leaving this room until she is done. Holloway's jaw worked. He stayed, arms crossed by the door. Mara stood, retrieved a penlight and reflex hammer from the supply cabinet, then took the gauze-wrapped object from her pocket and set it on the rolling tray. Holloway's eyes locked on it. What is that? She peeled back the tape and unrolled the gauze. Inside lay what looked to an untrained eye like a modified tuning fork. Slim, silver, a flat disc at one end, a matte black rubber grip at the other. 9 years old. Last calibrated by her own hands in a Fort Detrick lab that had been emptied and struck from inventory within a month. A neural oscillation calibrator, built to interface with the Stillwater bridge and re-establish its correct frequency. That device isn't approved for clinical use. It was approved within the Stillwater protocol, declassified in 2018. The approval transfers to civilian use on declassification. I can cite the Federal Register entry if you'd like. She looked at Wesley. Sir, may I place this against the point behind your right ear? Yes. Claire exhaled slowly. Danny moved closer without touching his father. Mara set the disc against the mastoid, her left hand resting on Wesley's shoulder, and pressed the activation point with her thumb. No sound, no warning. Wesley inhaled sharply. His right hand on the armrest went still. Not gradually, not incrementally. Still, the tremor that had lived in that hand for 18 years through 5 hospitals, 4 medication regimens, 2 surgical consultations, 1 ultrasound trial, every birthday card, every coffee mug, every one of 6,570 mornings, simply stopped. Wesley looked down at his own hand and said nothing. Claire made a sound that wasn't a word and turned away, a hand over her mouth. Danny's eyes went red. He didn't cry, just pressed a hand flat against the wall to hold himself up. Holloway hadn't moved, his arms had uncrossed. The file hung forgotten from his hand. "What did you do?" His voice had changed. Mara lifted the calibrator away. The bridge has run without recalibration for 18 years, at roughly 12% of its designed efficiency. What just happened is the bridge returning to 65%, its original field calibration. He needs a full clinical recalibration, 90 minutes, followed by physical therapy for motor pathways that spent 18 years compensating for the tremor. After that, we're not managing a movement disorder, we're reversing one. That technology doesn't exist in clinical literature. It exists, doctor, it just doesn't exist in yours. By 10 that morning, Meridian was moving the way a hospital moves when something has happened that no one has a procedure for. Radiology's chief was on the phone with Holloway. The research liaison waited in the hall outside Bay 9. A man from the VA sat by the elevator with a briefcase on his knees. At the nurse's station, Mara wrote in small, precise handwriting. Bridge marker confirmed, R mastoid. Calibrator response positive. R hand tremor ceased within 4 seconds of activation. Patient reports subjective stillness for first time in 18 years. Protocol required. Full recalibration session, imaging cervical loss salamic OT consult for motor retraining. She underlined motor retraining. Claire found her there. He's asking for you. Inside, Wesley's sweater had been smoothed. His posture suddenly changed. The chair now held a man who was thinking again, not a man who had stopped expecting anything. His right hand lay still in his lap. He looked up when she entered. "I want to know who you are." Mara pulled a stool close. "My name is Mara Stills, that part is real." "And the rest?" She looked at each of them in turn. "Captain Mara Stills, United States Army, retired. I served with the Joint Neural Research Group at Fort Detrick, 2012 to 2017. The team tracking long-term outcomes for soldiers with stillwater implants. 37 of them. We were building toward a full clinical protocol. In 2017, the funding was pulled, the program shut down, and I was told to seal the files and report back to my regular post. I filed 3 formal objections. I requested a congressional review. Denied every time. I resigned my commission the following spring, went to nursing school, and came to Chicago." Danny asked, "Why a nurse and not a doctor?" "Because I had 37 names. 22 were still alive when I last had access. I knew that eventually one of them would walk into a hospital, and the only way I'd be there to help was if I was on the floor, not behind a desk, not in research, on the floor where patients come in." She paused. "I've worked at Meridian 9 years. I never opened that gauze until this morning." Wesley had been watching her face the whole time, reading her the way he'd once read men under interrogation. "I'm on that list." "Yes, sir." "What number?" 9. He closed his eyes and kept them closed nearly a minute. When he opened them, something had changed in his face. The look of a man realizing that 18 years of silence hadn't been absence, but something waiting. "I owe you something." "No, sir. I told my children to stop hoping 3 years ago. Told them I was done with new doctors, new theories. The only reason I'm here is that Claire made this appointment without telling me. I didn't find out until we were already on the highway." Claire looked at the floor. "I told myself the whole drive it'd be the same as every other time." He looked at his hand again. "Then you walked in and saw something nobody bothered to look for in 18 years. He extended his right hand, steady, across the space between them. Mara took it. He gripped it once, firm and deliberate, the grip of a man who hadn't been able to grip anything with that hand in 18 years. "Captain Stills, thank you." Her throat tightened, she nodded once. The door opened. Holloway stood there, same white coat, same gold pin, same parted hair, but something in the architecture of his face had shifted. He'd spent the last hour on the phone with people he didn't usually call. He looked at Mara first. "I've spoken with the research committee chair, the department director, and," a pause, "2 people at the Department of Defense whose names I'm not permitted to say in a patient room. Colonel Cord will be admitted under my service as attending of record, effective now. Radiology runs the DTI series within the hour. You're listed as clinical lead." He looked at Wesley. "Colonel, I apologize for how this morning began. I told you to discharge, told this nurse she was overstepping, told her to report to my office. I was wrong on all 3 counts." Wesley nodded once. Holloway turned back to Mara. "There's also the question of the other men. 22 alive when I last had access, 9 years ago. How many now?" I don't know. I haven't been allowed near the list. He was quiet a moment. This afternoon I'm calling the board chair and the dean of the medical school. I'm going to propose a formal clinical program for identifying and treating veterans carrying still water implants. If you do that, Mara said, do it because those men have been waiting 19 years. Not because of what happened in this room. Understood. He paused at the door. There's coffee in the break room. Been sitting since 6. Something almost rueful crossed his face. I believe I've owed you that apology considerably longer than this morning. He stepped out. The imaging came back by 2. On the diffusion tensor scan, the implant showed as a faint, structured trace running alongside the damaged right thalamocortical pathway. A second road built next to a ruined one, invisible to any protocol never calibrated to look for it. Neuroradiologist Dr. Ewan found Mara in the staff lounge, set her tablet down and sat without speaking for a moment. How long has this man been in a chair? Tremors started in 2006, the chair since 2012 when it spread to his balance. I've read thousands of DTI scans. I've never seen a trace like this. It looks like infrastructure, like someone built a second road. That's exactly what it is. Mara told her everything the protocol covered. She watched Ewan's face do what a face does when the floor of its beliefs quietly gives way and resets. The recalibration happened the next morning, 90 minutes, a small procedure room on the 4th floor. Mara ran the sequence she'd once practiced on models in a Fort Detrick lab, adjusting the bridge frequency across 7 stages. Wesley said nothing for the first 20 minutes. At stage 4, his right hand lifted from the armrest on its own. He turned it over, flexed each finger, index, middle, ring, pinky, motions he hadn't managed in 11 years. At the window, Claire pressed her forehead to the glass, shoulders shaking silently until she got hold of herself. Danny laid his hand over his father's steady one and left it there. By the end of that week, the first call came from outside. Margaret Garner of Columbus, Ohio. Her husband Victor had been in a chair since an IED in 2007. Right thalamic disruption, a tremor that had taken his mobility by 2015. A small scar behind his right ear that 3 doctors had called a nerve block site. Could someone help? Mara closed her eyes. Victor Garner, number 17. Mrs. Garner, my name is Mara Stills. Can you bring Victor to Chicago this week? Yes we can. I'll have a room ready. A pause. He's been shaking 16 years, can't eat without help. Is this going to work? I won't promise you an outcome. I can tell you we're going to look for what nobody else has looked for. The bridge placed in the field was built to hold him together. It's done that imperfectly for 16 years. We're going to give it back the frequency it was designed to run on. Margaret was quiet, then said, he hasn't slept more than 4 hours straight since it started. The tremors wake him, even at night. After recalibration, the load the bridge is fighting drops sharply. Most patients sleep that first night. Some sleep 12 hours. Some for the first time in years. Margaret cried the quiet way people cry when they've held it in too long to let it out loud. We'll be there Thursday. Mara wrote the name on her notepad, Victor Garner, Columbus, Thursday, and the phone rang again. By the following month, the Department of Defense sent a colonel from the Army Surgeon General's office and a federal attorney to review the situation. They sat across from Mara in the small second-floor office the hospital had given her. Captain Stills, you removed classified program materials from a federal facility in 2017. I removed personal training equipment signed out under my name in the final program inventory. It became personal property on declassification. There are ongoing national security considerations. The protocol's been public 6 years, Mara said. The implants haven't been manufactured in longer than that. There's no operational sensitivity left. What's sensitive is that your department left 37 men carrying these devices without telling them, without recalibration, without follow-up of any kind. What you're protecting isn't security. It's the record of what was decided. The attorney closed his folder. The door opened. Holloway, the hospital's board chair, retired Major General Frank Del Vecchio, now chair of Meridian's Ethics Committee, and 2 more attorneys. The board chair sat at the head of the table. I've spent the last 72 hours on the phone with the offices of 4 senators, 2 of them on armed services, along with 4 veterans' rights organizations and this hospital's council. Meridian is prepared to defend Captain Stills and her program in federal court, in the press, and before Congress. Del Vecchio spoke once, quietly. Stand down, these men were ours, she's bringing them back. The colonel and the attorney left 20 minutes later. Victor Garner's tremor responded at stage 3. His wife didn't look away from his hand for 50 minutes. A former ranger named Stuart Bellamy, who hadn't written his own name in 14 years, wrote his initials on a notepad his wife handed him, then stopped because he could no longer see the page clearly. Not everyone could be helped. 1 name on the list had died in 2021. 3 could never be found. 2 others had lost too much. The motor damage too advanced, the bridge too degraded, the pathways too remodeled for recalibration to reach. Mara met with each of them and told them the truth, every time, without softening it. One of them, a former Special Forces warrant officer named Gerald, gripped her hand at the end of their meeting. "You came. That's what I want you to understand. You came back." He died 6 weeks later. His wife wrote to say that the night before he passed, he told her someone finally knew his name again. Mara kept the letter in the top drawer of her desk. 6 months after that first morning in Bay 9, Meridian held a ceremony in its ground-floor conference center. Not for the press, which had already had its turn, but for staff, families, and veterans. In the front rows sat 11 men, every one of whom had arrived in a chair or losing function fast. 8 now stood for part of each day. 5 walked with canes, 2 without. 1, not yet ambulatory, could feed himself with his right hand for the first time in 12 years. Every one of them wore his service uniform. Wesley Cord walked to the podium on a cane, set it aside, and gripped the sides of the stand with both hands, steady. "I was told 18 years ago that my condition was permanent. I was told it again at 4 more hospitals over the following decade. At some point I stopped listening to doctors. Not because I'd lost faith in medicine, but because I'd lost faith in myself as someone who deserved to keep asking. 8 months ago my daughter made an appointment without telling me. I argued with her the whole drive there. A nurse named Mara Stills walked into the room and did her job. She actually did her job. She looked at me. 11 men who'd been forgotten have stood up out of their chairs in the last 6 months. 5 more begin treatment next month. I won't forget the men on that list who didn't live to be in this room. I stand here in part because of them. I want to thank Dr. Holloway, who had the courage to be wrong and the rarer courage to say so in public. I want to thank this hospital staff. I want to thank my children, who kept hoping when I told them to stop." He looked out over the room, "And I want to ask one person to come forward." Mara stood in the 3rd row, in her bright blue scrubs, the compass rose above her name badge. She hadn't expected this. Wesley left the cane behind and crossed the 4 steps to her on his own, the room watching him do it. He stopped in front of her, brought his right hand, steady, to his temple, and saluted. In the front rows, 11 men rose, some on canes, 2 without, and returned it. From the 4th row, Dr. Luciferin, who'd driven from Bethesda with files Mara hadn't seen in 9 years, stood and raised her hand. 2 nurses stood with her, then 3 more staff. At the back of the room, Dr. Robert Holloway, who had never worn a uniform, raised his hand in the careful, imperfect shape of a salute he knew he hadn't earned but gave anyway. Mara's chin stayed level. She raised her right hand, the one that had pressed a calibrator to a stranger's skull on a Tuesday morning and ended 18 years of silence, and held the salute. The room held its breath. Then she lowered her hand, the men lowered theirs, and the room broke into applause. Afterward, Victor Garner found her by the door and said nothing, just held out his right hand, strong and steady now, and gripped hers a long moment before letting go. Stuart Bellamy told her his granddaughter had started calling him Pop again, because he could hold her without dropping her. That was all he needed to say. Wesley came last. "The Army and Navy have jointly requested you accept reinstatement at full colonel to direct a new combined veterans neural restoration program." "I'm honored," she said, "and I'm going to decline. I came to Meridian because the men on that list needed someone with the civilian standing to walk into a room and actually see them, not someone in a chain of command. I'll sit on every committee they want me on, but I want to keep my scrubs. I want to do this work as a nurse." Wesley nodded once, looking at the compass rose on her badge, Wraith. She looked up. "Your call sign, Lucia Farron told me." "Yes, sir." He offered his hand again. She took it. "Understood, Captain. Meridian is fortunate, so are we." That evening, Mara walked home through Chicago in the December cold, the lake wind coming flat off the water, and didn't feel small once. The next morning, she was back on the floor at 5:50. At 8:15, she was called to a bay at the end of the hall. "New admit, family case, VA referral." Through the glass, a man in a wheelchair, his left arm held stiff at his side, a tremor moving through it at a frequency she recognized. Beside him, a woman gripping the chair's handles. Behind them, a young man who couldn't decide whether to stand near the door or near his father. Mara paused, breathed in, and pushed the door open. "Good morning, I'm Mara Stills. I'll be your intake nurse today."